So I'm continuing the article, Understanding the Criteria for Chilazon, regarding the Techeilet, the blue dye used on the Tzitzit. The video got cut off, so I'm going to start back up here. I'm on page 7. Again, there's links in the description for this article as well as some videos. So the mounds of Murex trunculus shells, as well as two related species. This is archaeological evidence. Murex brundaris and Purpura hemastoma have been found at ancient dye sites in many locations. These shells were cracked in the exact spot to get the dye. This is solid proof that Murex trunculus was used in ancient dyeing, but does not imply that it was used for dyeing blue. A 13th century BCE potsherd from Sarepta has a stripe of dye that is believed to be from Murex trunculus. It is a purple stripe with no detectable blue or indigo content. A vat from a dig at Tel Shikmona has purple Murex dye on it, not blue as previously described in a brochure from the Techeilet Foundation. From the picture, it is obviously purple, but the text erroneously said blue. Pliny speaks in great depth about dyeing with Murex, different shades of purple, red and violet, but not blue. Patil followers point out that at one site, the shells of Murex brundaris and Purpura hemastoma were together, but the Murex trunculus shells were in a different area. They leap to the conclusion that Murex trunculus must have been used for dyeing blue. They are ignoring Pliny, among others, who state that the famed Tyrian purple shade was produced by double dyeing with Murex brundaris and Purpura hemastoma. Thus, it was logical that those two species were found together. And apart from Murex trunculus, how does that suggest Murex trunculus was used for dyeing blue? In fact, it is hard to see how chemical analysis of archaeological finds could ever support the idea that Murex trunculus was used for dyeing blue. If the chemical is purely indigo, the natural assumption would be that the source was plant indigo, which was used around the world. If indigo was found with traces of purple, it might be suggestive of Murex trunculus dye. Murex trunculus dye is naturally a mix of purple and blue and has to be irradiated to induce a photochemical reaction from which blue dye results. If this process were not completed, the dye would be mostly blue with traces of purple. However, Murex trunculus produces dyes with varying mixtures of indigo and purple, bromated indigo. Some batches of dye may turn out to be almost all indigo, and other batches might turn out to be all purple. Thus, even when the intention is to use the natural purple-blue of Murex trunculus, a particular batch could turn out to be almost purple indigo. Also, mixing of dyes was common. A mix of blue and purple might be the product of Murex trunculus, or it might be the mixture of plant indigo with purple dye and other Murex species. And remember, they're saying that indigo dye and the blue from Murex trunculus is chemically the same molecule. So even if they find it naturally, there's no way you can tell that it came from, there's no reasonable way to tell that it came from the Murex species. Not all is there, so not only is there no archaeological supports for the notion that Murex trunculus was used to dye blue, it may be that it is not even possible for archaeological evidence to accomplish this through chemical analysis alone. See, it has been suggested that the image of a Murex shell on a Bar Kokhba coin is apparently irrefutable evidence that Murex trunculus was the source of Techeilet. Why else would a non-kosher species appear unless it was used for a mitzvah? But there were creatures that were used regarding the tabernacle and things. It has nothing to do with it being kosher. Kosher is for eating. Murex dyeing was a major industry, with some regions employing half their population in Murex fishing. Moreover, the Murex was a status symbol associated with wealth and royalty, and Bar Kokhba was not original. Murex images showed up on coins from many places, both before and after Bar Kokhba's time. It would appear that Bar Kokhba used the Murex image either for the same reason as others did, status symbol, commercial importance, or perhaps to give his government the appearance of more legitimacy by following the lead of other governments that printed coins with Murex images. Linguistic proofs. Patil followers offer some linguistic arguments in attempting to support their position. The word Chilazon is a general term for snail, not only in modern Hebrew but in some other languages as well. Aside from not pointing specifically to Murex trunculus, it is not clear which species Chilazon referred to at the time of the Gemara. It may have been a general term for mollusk, Did it only include gastropods, or could it have included cephalopods such as octopus or squid? This is unclear. Patil writings also mention the Septuagint's Greek translation of Techeilet as porphyros, word used for purple or murex. Rabbi Herzog raises this issue and dismisses it rather handily. He points out that everywhere else, including that same chapter, the Septuagint uses, I don't know this, kinthos for Techeilet and porphyra for argamon. So argamon is like the purple, and shows how the Hebrew text they must have been given could not have matched our Masoretic tradition, and that the translation was probably given for argamon, not Techeilet. So the idea there's a lot of people that think that the Septuagint is the one that the 70 rabbis made for the Library of Alexandria. But we have to remember that the Library of Alexandria burned down. We do not have the Septuagint. And the Septuagint that they call now as the Septuagint is just a Greek translation. It's not necessarily from a product of the historical Septuagint that was written by the rabbis. And the other problem is that the Septuagint that we have today does not match the things that it says they specifically wrote into the Septuagint for matters of clarity. There are certain words that were used in certain places, and that's a marker that shows that was the Septuagint. And the Greek translation that they call the Septuagint today does not have those passages in it written in the way that they should have been. So some have suggested that Ra'avia Berachot 9b Simon 25 equates Techeilet with porphyrin, the Greek word for murex, though they do not supply a full explanation of this statement by Ra'avia, and do not mention that in both Greek and Latin the word for murex and the word for purple are the same. Let us examine the passage in question. Ra'avia quotes a Yerushalmi, so Talmud Yerushalmi, a part that is no longer extant, explaining the time for reciting the morning Shema, from the time when one can distinguish between Techeilet and Karti, between porphyrin and parufinin, which is a coat that is called in Latin purpura. A logical explanation of this missing Yerushalmi is that the second comparison, I think it says, Bain porphyrin, Bain parufinin, is a Keller distinction that would be as hard to tell apart in the dark as blue Techeilet and green Karti. Porphyrin is from the Greek word meaning purple. Parufinin, from the Ra'avia's description, appears to be from Greek parufeno, meaning a robe with a hem or border of purple, which is consistent with the Hagahot, where this Keller is equated with argamon. Thus, Bain porphyrin, Bain parufinin might mean to distinguish between the purple border of a robe and the rest of the garment. Patil Techeilet Foundation suggests that this Yerushalmi is equating murex with Techeilet. Obviously, they cannot mean that Techeilet is the murex, but rather the source of Techeilet is the murex. However, this logic would render the Yerushalmi as between Techeilet and Karti, between a murex snail and a purple coat. Aside from sounding bizarre, it is difficult to see how a purple coat could be the source of Karti. Karti is usually understood to be green, like a leek. There is a minority view that Karti is not green, but a different color close to Techeilet. However, even if you rely on this view, which is based on a citation from Aruch, which is no longer extant, to explain a Yerushalmi that is no longer extant, the wording still doesn't work. Additionally, this would require equating Karti with argamon, which does not fit with any opinion. There does not appear to be a way to interpret Ra'avia's statement as equating murex with Techeilet. So, proof of omission. There is a simple logic that argues that murex trunculus as Chilazon. At the time of the Gemara, purple dyeing with murex snails was pervasive throughout the region. This may explain why the Gemara does not mention the source of the argamon, the red purple dye. Someone knew. The murex snails were famous. Murex dye sold for more than its weight in gold. Its shell appeared on many governments' coins. Royal edicts were issued to monopolize the use of the dye, and Pliny wrote about the murex dyeing process. There was even a well-known term for the murex that was the same in Greek and Latin, porphyra or purpura. If this species was the source of Techeilet, why didn't the Gemara tell us this? Why didn't the Gemara say that the Chilazon was from the family of purple-giving snails? Wouldn't it just have been simpler and clearer than the signs provided by the Gemara? It is implausible that the Gemara would choose to ignore a well-known classification term, opting instead to describe the Chilazon through a set of characteristics from which someone might be able to determine the correct species. A summary. The identity of the Chilazon was lost for many centuries. Without a tradition as to the correct species, and without a sample of ancient Techeilet, it might not be possible to identify the Chilazon with certainty. However, there are minimum requirements that can be expected to be met in order to seriously entertain the possibility of particular species being the Chilazon. Chazal, our sages, knowing that the identity of the Chilazon, chose several distinguishing characteristics to describe it. For a species to be considered as the Chilazon, these criteria would have to be clearly met in such a way that would have been reasonable for Chazal to have chosen these statements to describe the species. The Gemara also provides chemical tests to distinguish between the genuine Techeilet and Chilazon, imitation Techeilet. Any Techeilet that would clearly fail this test could be rejected with certainty. It would also be reasonable to expect the species under consideration to fit most of the characteristics of the Chilazon that can be deduced from sources outside of the sugya of Techeilet. So, Murex trunculus does not meet any of the criteria. Arguments brought in favor of Murex trunculus depend on new interpretations of the Gemara that contradict the classical Mefarshim and even the precise language of the Gemara. Even with these explanations, it could not be reasonably stated that Chazal would have chosen these statements to describe the Murex trunculus. The Techeilet dye produced by the Patil Techeilet Foundation must fail the chemical test provided with the Gemara, since it is the exact same molecule as Chilazon. Additionally, the Gemara's tests were designed to make indigo fail the test. Patil Techeilet is indigo. Thus, Murex-derived indigo as Techeilet is in utterly untenable position. This is acknowledged even by the chemist whose work led to Patil's group formation. Murex trunculus meets few of the secondary criteria, and archaeological evidence provides no support whatsoever for the proposition that Murex trunculus was used in the ancient dyeing of blue in general, let alone Techeilet in particular. Since Murex snails were famous for their purple dyeing, and there was a well-known term for Murex, it would seem rather odd that the Gemara chose not to use this term, instead providing descriptive statements that have failed to provide a consensus opinion for many centuries. So in summary, the case for Murex trunculus as the Chilazon has little merit. Indeed, the evidence against Murex trunculus as the Chilazon is overwhelming. Okay, so interesting article, but I'm going to leave you a link to a video where the Ratzinger Techeilet, which is associated with the cuttlefish, is proposed. And I think that there are some interesting things that go along with that. You notice that there's a couple things that come to play here. And one is that our Tzitzit have 8 strings. The Chilazon has 8 tentacles. You see that it's kind of like striped like that. Well, if you take a blue thread of Techeilet and you wrap it in your Tzitzit, you're going to get almost like a checkered pattern, just like the Chilazon. And it says that the Malavush would grow with it. That was one of the statements in the Gemara. Well, it has this little flippy little fin thing going around it. So just like a fish has fins, and that was one of the things that it was described almost like a fish. So this little this little thing like a fin goes around it, and that grows with the creature. And then there's another indication, like if we're talking about like what does this relate to the Torah? So this creature right here, when it mates, I'm not the biologist, I'm taking somebody else's word for this, but whenever it mates, whenever its young is born, the mother and whoever it mated with in the ocean die at the same time, regardless of where they are, like distance away from each other. They die together. So Techeilet is associated with the eyes. Sorry, the Tzitzit are associated with the eyes to keep your eyes from strain. And that corresponds to the idea of the Sota, the wife who was suspected of jealousy, and they go to the temple, they get some dirt, mix it in some water, erasing the name of God in the water. She would drink it, and if she was innocent, she would more or less be blessed with a child, and if she was guilty, that she would die, and whoever that she was with, committed adultery with, would die somewhere else, right? That they would die together. So that fits that characteristic if we're associating it with the Torah. And the other thing is, obviously, when Bnei Israel were leaving Egypt and they were at the sea, it says there was basically a black cloud that was like separated the Pharaoh's army from Israel. And this creature, when it escapes, it emits a black cloud of ink, right? And it escapes through the sea, escapes through the water, and that's what happened. The sea split. There was a black cloud to keep the Egyptians in their place. Israel fled through the sea to safety, and I can't see a better creature to demonstrate, even to a child, that the story of the Exodus from Egypt and passing through Yam Suf, passing through the sea. So, I mean, it's very easy to associate, that cuttlefish with this, because it almost, like we say, it nearly looks like it. But we're gonna talk about some stuff in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch about how to tie the tzitzit. But it should also be known that this isn't the only way to tie tzitzit. There are other customs as to how to tie tzitzit. It is not a monopoly. So that idea associated with this striping, you could take it as it is. But anyway, it's an interesting topic, and this probably won't be the last that is mentioned on it. I'll probably do some more videos. Thank you for your time.